"You're coming with me," the Duke said after seeing a poor black maid beaten by her in-laws. The church bell tolls. Mud splashes under boots. A whip cracks through the cold morning air. A young maid, trembling but unbroken, is dragged into the yard, mocked, beaten, left without mercy. Then hooves thunder. A carriage halts. A nobleman steps down, cloak sweeping the dirt. His voice cuts through the jeers. "You're coming with me." But what awaits her in the Duke's stone manor? Whispers slither through the halls, scandal stirs in the village, and even his own mother warns of ruin. A cruel magistrate sharpens his pen, while her in-laws scheme to drag her back in chains. She carries only a wooden cross and a song that can silence a room. He carries a vow to protect her, no matter the cost. But can love and faith withstand a world built on cruelty and lies, or will power and prejudice tear them apart? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The pale dawn light crept through the farmhouse's grimy windows as Amara's raw hands moved across the rough wooden floor. Her knees ached from hours of scrubbing, and her fingers burned from the harsh lye soap. The autumn chill seeped through her thin dress, making her shiver. Her sister-in-law had forbidden her to light the hearth, claiming she didn't deserve warmth. Still crawling about like a slug, her sister-in-law's shrill voice cut through the morning quiet. "The floor's as dirty as your soul." The cruel woman stood over Amara, arms crossed over her chest. In the corner, Amara's brother-in-law slouched at the table, already deep in his cups despite the early hour. The bitter smell of ale hung in the air. "I pray you find peace in your heart, sister," Amara whispered, continuing her work. Her soft voice carried the lilt of her Caribbean homeland. "Peace?" the sister-in-law spat. "I'll show you. Peace." She kicked the bucket of dirty water, sending it splashing across the floor Amara had just cleaned. Before Amara could move, rough hands seized her arms. Her brother-in-law had lurched from his seat, his ale-soaked breath hot on her neck as he dragged her toward the door. "Time to teach you proper respect," he growled. They pulled her into the muddy yard, her feet slipping in the cold muck. The autumn air bit through her wet clothes. Already, curious villagers gathered at the fence, their faces a mix of pity and fear. "Renounce your heathen ways," her sister-in-law demanded, grabbing a horse whip from the stable wall. "Prove you're grateful for all we've done." Amara lifted her chin, though her heart hammered in her chest. "I cannot renounce my faith. God is my strength and comfort." The whip cracked through the air. Amara bit back a cry as it struck her shoulders. She would not give them the satisfaction of her tears. Still defiant, another crack of the whip. "You're nothing but property, girl." The sound of approaching hooves barely registered through Amara's pain, but the gathered villagers' sudden intake of breath made her look up. A magnificent carriage had halted at the fence. Its polished wood gleamed even in the weak autumn light, the coat of arms on its door marking it as belonging to nobility. The door swung open, and a tall figure emerged. His fine cloak swept the mud as he strode forward, face dark with fury. Amara had never seen the Duke of Rothwell in person, but there was no mistaking his bearing. Every line of him spoke of power and authority. "What is the meaning of this?" His voice cut through the morning air like a sword. Her brother-in-law stumbled back, the whip falling from his slack fingers. "Your Grace, this is a family matter." In 2 long strides, the Duke reached them. He snatched up the fallen whip, his knuckles white around its handle. "Family? This is barbarism. She's our property," her sister-in-law shrieked. "Her husband's dead. She belongs to us. No human being is property," the Duke said, his voice deadly quiet. His gaze fell on Amara, and something flickered in his eyes. Rage at her treatment, yes, but also something softer. "You're coming with me." Before her in-laws could protest further, he swept off his cloak and wrapped it around Amara's shoulders. The warm wool enveloped her, carrying the scent of sandalwood and leather. "Your Grace," Amara whispered, hardly daring to believe this wasn't a dream born of pain. "I don't wish to burden. The burden would be leaving you here." His gentle tone contrasted sharply with the glare he leveled at her tormentors. He guided her toward his carriage, one hand protectively at her back. "She's a liar and a thief," her brother-in-law shouted, finding his courage in desperation. "She'll bring shame to your household." The Duke lifted Amara into the carriage as if she weighed nothing. She sank into the soft leather seat, trembling from cold and fear and relief all at once. The carriage lurched forward, wheels clattering on the rutted road. Through the window, Amara watched the farmhouse grow smaller, her in-laws' shouts fading into the distance. She clutched the Duke's cloak tighter around her shoulders, uncertain what fate awaited her but knowing it had to be better than what she left behind. The carriage wheels clattered over the rutted country roads as afternoon shadows lengthened across the fields. Inside, Amara sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, the Duke's cloak still wrapped around her shoulders. The fine wool felt foreign against her work-roughened skin. Across from her, the Duke of Rothwell stared out the window, his jaw clenched tight. The anger still radiated from him in waves, though his voice had been gentle when speaking to her. Every now and then, his gaze would flicker to her, noting the welts visible on her neck, and his hands would tighten into fists. "Your Grace," Amara ventured softly. "I cannot express my gratitude." "No gratitude is needed," he cut in, though his tone remained kind. "What I witnessed was unconscionable. No human being deserves such treatment." The carriage rolled on through the autumn afternoon. Fields gave way to carefully tended parkland, and finally, Rothwell Manor came into view. Amara couldn't help but gasp at the sight. The sprawling stone estate rose proudly against the darkening sky, its windows gleaming like jewels in the setting sunday. Servants moved purposefully about the grounds, carrying baskets of vegetables from the kitchen gardens and bringing in loads of firewood before nightfall. As the carriage drew to a halt before the main entrance, the great oak doors swung open. A woman emerged, her gray hair neat beneath her cap, her black dress marking her as the housekeeper. Her eyes widened at the sight of Amara descending from the Duke's carriage. "Your Grace," she curtsied deeply, "we did not expect your return so soon." "Mrs. Harland," the Duke acknowledged. "This is Amara. She requires immediate care. See that she's given warm broth and a chamber in the servants' wing." Mrs. Harland's gaze swept over Amara's bedraggled appearance, noting the signs of mistreatment. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Of course, Your Grace." Right away, as the Duke strode into the house, Mrs. Harland gestured for Amara to follow her. They passed through a series of corridors, the stone walls lined with portraits of stern-faced nobles. Already, Amara could hear the whispers beginning among the servants they passed. "A new maid? In the Duke's own carriage? Did you see? She's black." What could His Grace be thinking? Mrs. Harland led her to the kitchen, where the cook was stirring a large pot of soup. "A bowl of broth for the new arrival," she ordered, then turned to Amara. "Sit there, girl. You look ready to faint." Amara sank onto a wooden bench, the warmth from the kitchen hearth seeping into her tired bones. The cook placed a wet, steaming bowl before her, and the rich smell made her stomach growl. She hadn't eaten since the previous day. "Careful now, not too fast," Mrs. Harland cautioned as Amara lifted the spoon. The housekeeper's face had softened slightly, though wariness still lingered in her eyes. "Once you've finished, I'll show you to your chamber." The broth warmed Amara from the inside out, easing some of the day's aches. When she'd finished, Mrs. Harland led her up a narrow staircase to the servants' wing. The room she was given was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a small window overlooking the chapel. "Rest now, Mrs. Harland said, lighting a single candle. "We'll speak more of your duties tomorrow." Left alone, Amara sank onto the bed, still wrapped in the Duke's cloak. The events of the day felt almost dreamlike. Through her window, she could see the chapel's spire rising against the night sky. The bell began to toll, its deep voice rolling across the estate grounds, marking the evening hour. Amara slipped to her knees beside the bed, clasping her hands in prayer. "Dear Lord," she whispered, "grant me strength for whatever path you have set before me, and bless the Duke of Rothwell for his kindness to your humble servant." The chapel bell's final toll faded into silence. Amara climbed into the narrow bed, her body heavy with exhaustion. Despite the strange surroundings and the uncertainty of her future, sleep claimed her quickly, deeper and more peaceful than any rest she'd known in months. Dawn's first light crept through the small window of Amara's chamber, painting the plain walls with gentle gold. She woke instantly, years of habit bringing her to alertness before the sun fully rose. The narrow bed felt strange, too soft after months of sleeping on straw, but the quiet of early morning was familiar. Straightening her borrowed dress, Amara made her way down to the kitchen. The stone corridors were still cool and dim, though she could hear the sennat, first stirrings of life below. In the kitchen, 2 scullery maids already worked at cleaning the hearth. They paused when Amara entered, their eyes following her every move. "Good morrow," Amara said softly, reaching for a broom. The maids exchanged glances, but didn't respond. "What do you think you're doing?" one finally asked, her tone sharp with suspicion. "The floor needs sweeping," Amara replied simply, beginning her task. She could feel their stares boring into her back. "Think you're better than us, do you?" the second maid muttered. "Riding in His Grace's own carriage?" Amara kept her eyes lowered, focusing on her work. "No," she said quietly. "I only wish to earn my keep." In the great hall above, morning light streamed through tall windows as servants laid out breakfast. The Duke of Rothwell had barely taken his seat when his mother swept into the room, her gray-streaked hair perfectly arranged beneath an elegant cap, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Aiden," the Dowager Duchess began without preamble, "we must discuss your impulsive action yesterday." Aiden set down his cup with careful precision. "Good morning to you too, Mother. Do not take that tone with me." She settled into her chair, smoothing her silk skirts. "The entire county is already buzzing with gossip. A foreign maid, rescued from a public beating, brought to live at Rothwell Manor? Your reputation cannot withstand such scandal." "My reputation?" Aiden's voice held an edge. "And what of basic Christian charity? Would you have had me ride past while they whipped an innocent woman?" "Of course not," his mother snapped. "But you could have ordered them to stop and left it at that. Instead, you've brought her here, under your own roof. People will talk. Let them talk." Down in the kitchen, Amara had moved on to helping with the breakfast preparations. Despite the cook's initial reluctance, her quiet efficiency and careful handling of the fine china had earned a grudging acceptance. Still, she felt the sideways glances, heard the whispered comments. The morning wore on, and Amara threw herself into whatever task she could find. Polishing brass, folding linens, sweeping the endless corridors. Her back ached from yesterday's beating, but the familiar rhythm of work was comforting. She was scrubbing a doorstep when Boots appeared in her line of vision. Looking up, she found the Duke watching her with concern. "You should be resting," he said gently. "Your injuries need time to heal." Amara dipped her head respectfully. "Your Grace is kind, but I must earn my place here. You have nothing to prove." "Please, Your Grace," she met his eyes briefly. "Work gives purpose, and I am well enough for it." Aiden studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Very well, but do not overtax yourself." As evening settled over the estate, Aiden stood in the library, gazing out at the darkening grounds. Behind him, a fire crackled in the hearth, but its warmth didn't reach the cold knot of worry in his chest. The whispers had reached his ears throughout the day. Servants' gossip, concerned letters from neighboring estates, veiled questions about his judgment. Had he acted rashly? Not in saving her, that he would never regret, but in bringing her here. Had he exposed both Amara and his household to danger? The society he moved in could be cruel to those who defied its unwritten rules. In her small chamber above, Amara knelt beside her bed, hands clasped in prayer. "Lord," she whispered, "I beg you, do not let my presence bring ruin upon this house. Shield His Grace from harm for His kindness to me, and grant me wisdom to find my path, without bringing scandal to my protector." The chapel bell tolled the evening hour, its deep notes carrying across the darkened estate grounds. Morning frost glittered on the cobblestones as servants bustled about the courtyard, preparing for the weekly trip to market. Baskets clattered, and breath rose in white puffs against the chilly air. Amara emerged from the kitchen door, wrapping her shawl tightly around her shoulders. "I can help carry those," she offered, gesturing to the heavy market baskets lined up against the wall. The cook's assistant, Mary, frowned. "Your shoulders are still bruised from yesterday. You should stay behind." "I am stronger than I look," Amara insisted, lifting a basket with careful grace despite the pain that flared across her back. "Listen to her voice," sneered Thomas, one of the footmen. "Sounds like she's from another world entirely." "And look at her skin," whispered Jane, a kitchen maid. "Dark as the devil's own." "That's enough," Mary cut in sharply. "She's willing to work, and that's what matters. As they made their way down the path toward the village, Amara kept pace steadily, though her arms trembled with the basket's weight. She had learned long ago that proving her worth meant working twice as hard as others. A commotion from the manor drew their attention. Young Clara, the Duke's niece, had escaped her nurse again and stumbled into the garden, coughing in the cold morning air. "Miss Clara," the nurse called frantically. "You'll catch your death." Without hesitation, Amara set down her basket and approached the pale child. "Good morning, little miss," she said softly. "Shall we go inside where it's warm?" Clara looked up at her with wide eyes. "I don't want to go back to bed. It's so lonely there." "Perhaps we could sing together instead," Amara suggested. When Clara nodded eagerly, Amara began a gentle hymn, her rich voice carrying clearly in the morning air. "Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound." The child's face lit up, and she joined in softly, letting Amara guide her back toward the house. The servants paused in their tasks, surprised by the beauty of the song and the way Clara trusted this stranger. From his study window, Aidan watched the scene unfold. Something in his chest tightened at the sight of Amara's gentle handling of his niece, the way she soothed the often fractious child with nothing more than a song and a kind smile. Later that evening, as Amara crossed the chapel after prayers, the chaplain beckoned her aside. His stern face was thoughtful as he studied her. "You sing the hymns well," he observed. "Where did you learn them?" "From my father, sir," Amara replied. "He was a free man who taught at a mission in Barbados." "And how came you to England?" Amara's hands twisted in her skirts. "After father was lost in a storm at sea, I had no one left. A merchant's wife offered to bring me to England as her maid, but when we arrived," she swallowed hard. "The indenture papers were not what she had promised. I was bound to service for 5 years to pay for my passage." The chaplain's expression softened slightly. "And your faith sustained you through this trial?" "Yes, sir. Father always said that God's love knows no boundaries of nation or color." Unknown to them, Aidan stood in the shadow of a pillar, listening intently to every word. Later, in his study, he sat before the dying fire, turning Amara's story over in his mind. A free woman, educated by her father, trapped into servitude through deception. It was a far cry from the accusations her former in-laws had hurled. In her small chamber, Amara sat on the edge of her bed, holding a simple wooden cross that hung from a leather cord around her neck. It was all she had left of her father, his last gift to her before that fatal voyage. Her fingers traced the familiar curves as she hummed softly, finding comfort in the old hymn. Outside her door, Sarah, one of the more spiteful maids, pressed her ear close, drinking in every note. Her lips curved in a satisfied smile as she thought of how this tidbit about the mysterious new maid's past would spread through the servants' hall by morning. The morning sun cast long shadows through Rothwell Manor's windows as Mrs. Harland made her way to the Duke's study. Her sensible shoes clicked against the polished floors, her face drawn with concern. She found Aidan reviewing estate papers at his desk. "Your Grace," she said, closing the door quietly behind her. "I feel it my duty to bring something to your attention." Aidan looked up, noting her troubled expression. "What is it, Mrs. Harland?" "There's talk below stairs, Your Grace. The staff." She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "They question why you've taken such a personal interest in the new maid. Some suggest it's improper." Aidan's jaw tightened. "I see. I mean no disrespect, Your Grace. But perhaps if she were placed in service elsewhere." "Thank you, Mrs. Harland. That will be all." The housekeeper curtsied and withdrew, leaving Aidan to his thoughts. That evening, silver gleamed in candlelight as the family gathered for supper. The Dowager Duchess sat rigid in her chair, her face a mask of displeasure. She waited until the first course was served before speaking. "Son," she said, her voice sharp as cut crystal, "this situation cannot continue. The girl must go." "Mother," Aidan began, but she pressed on. Already the neighbors whisper. "Lady Pembroke called today, full of questions about your rescue." She practically spat the word. "What were you thinking, bringing her here?" "I was thinking that I could not stand by and watch an innocent woman be beaten in the street." Aidan's voice was quiet but firm. "Then you should have found her a position elsewhere, not brought her into your own household where she stays." Aidan set down his fork with careful precision. She remains under my protection, and that is final." The dowager's face flushed. "You risk everything, your reputation. You're standing in society. Some things matter more than reputation, mother." Later that evening, Aiden found Amara in the library, carefully dusting the shelves, despite his instructions that she need not work while recovering. She startled at his entrance, nearly dropping her duster. "Your Grace, please, sit." He gestured to a chair. "I wish to understand what brought you to this point." Slowly, Amara sank into the seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "After my husband died," she began softly, "his family claimed I still owed on my indenture. They said the marriage hadn't canceled the debt." Her voice caught. "They treated me like property, not a widow of their son." "That was unlawful," Aiden said, his tone gentle. "I had no way to prove otherwise. The original papers were conveniently lost." A tear slid down her cheek, followed by another. "I tried to be strong, to endure as my father taught me, but—" Her composure finally broke, shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. Aiden pulled out his handkerchief, a fine lawn square embroidered with his initials, and offered it to her. "You've shown remarkable strength," he said softly, moved by her quiet dignity even in grief. She accepted the handkerchief with trembling fingers. "Your kindness shames me, Your Grace. I've brought discord to your household." The discord was already here, in hearts too quick to judge what they don't understand. As night settled over the manor, Amara's voice rose from the servants' hall, singing an old hymn as she mended linens. The pure, clear notes drifted upward through the house. "Be thou my vision, O Lord of my heart, naught be all else to me, save that thou art." One by one, servants paused in their evening tasks, listening despite themselves. Cook's hand stilled on her spoon, a footman forgot his polishing, and even Mrs. Harlan's stern face softened at the sound. At the top of the grand staircase, Aiden stood motionless in the shadows, feeling something shift deep within his chest as the hymn wrapped around him. In that moment, rank and status seemed to fall away, leaving only the pure, honest beauty of Amara's faith reaching toward heaven. 2 days after their conversation in the library, warm candlelight filled Rothwell Manor's music room. Aiden had arranged what he called a small musical evening for the household, though his true purpose lay deeper. Crystal sconces sparkled on the walls, and fresh flowers graced every table. In one corner, 3 musicians tuned their instruments: violin, flute, and pianoforte. The room slowly filled with an unusual mix of people. Footmen stood awkwardly in their best livery, while maids smoothed their aprons nervously. Mrs. Harlan positioned herself near the door, watching everything with sharp eyes. The Dowager Duchess sat rigidly in her favorite chair, her fan tapping an impatient rhythm against her knee. Amara slipped in quietly, wearing her simple black dress but with a fresh white collar that brightened her face. She tried to blend into the shadows at the back of the room, but Aiden noticed her immediately. He had been watching for her. "Ladies and gentlemen," he addressed the gathering, his voice warm and inclusive. "I thank you all for joining us this evening. Music has always brought people together, and I hope tonight will be no exception." The musicians began with gentle chamber pieces. The melody floated through the room, easing some of the tension from hunched shoulders. Even the Dowager's fan slowed its aggressive tapping. After several pieces, Aiden rose again. "I understand we have another musician among us." He turned toward Amara, his eyes gentle. "Miss Amara, would you honor us with a song?" A murmur rippled through the room. Amara's hands twisted in her skirts, but she squared her shoulders and stepped forward. "If it pleases your grace," she said softly. "I know only hymns and simple songs." "Then share what moves your heart," Aiden replied. The musicians fell silent. Amara closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and began to sing. Her voice, pure and clear, filled the room with amazing grace. The familiar words took on new meaning through her voice, each note carrying the weight of her own journey from bondage to freedom. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound, that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see." As she sang, something remarkable happened. The stern-faced first footman, known for his rigid propriety, blinked rapidly and pulled out his handkerchief. A kitchen maid who had previously whispered unkind words about Amara pressed her hands to her heart, tears streaming freely down her face. Even Mrs. Harlan's expression softened, her usual frown melting into wonder. The Dowager Duchess sat very still, her fan motionless in her lap. As Amara's voice soared through the final verse, something flickered across the older woman's face, a memory, perhaps, or a revelation that shook her careful prejudices. When the last note faded, silence held for a heartbeat. Then applause erupted, startling in its enthusiasm. The footmen forgot their dignity to clap vigorously, while the maids wiped their eyes and smiled. Mrs. Harlan nodded approvingly, and though the Dowager did not applaud, her usual look of disapproval had given way to thoughtful consideration. Aidan stood beaming, his quiet pride evident in every line of his face, watching Amara's graceful acceptance of the praise. Seeing how her gentle spirit had touched even the hardest hearts, he felt his own heart shift. The warmth in his chest whenever she was near, the way his eyes sought her in every room, he could no longer deny these feelings were more than mere concern for her welfare. As the evening drew to a close, Aidan approached Amara. "Allow me to escort you back," he said softly. She nodded, and they left the music room together. Their footsteps echoed in the quiet hallway as they walked toward the servants' wing. Neither hurrying, both aware of each precious moment. The candlelight from wall sconces cast gentle shadows around them, creating a pocket of intimacy in the vast house. At the door leading to the servants' quarters, they paused. Amara turned to face him, her eyes bright, with unshed tears of joy from the evening's acceptance. Aidan looked down at her, his heart full of words he could not yet speak. Their gaze held, weighted with unspoken feelings, hope, and the sweet ache of possibilities that could not yet be acknowledged. "Good night, Your Grace," Amara finally whispered, dropping into a small curtsy. "Good night, Miss Amara," he replied softly, watching as she disappeared through the door, both their hearts lighter and heavier than before. Dawn broke cold and gray over Rothwell Manor. Frost glittered on the window panes, and servants hurried through their morning tasks, their breath visible in the chilly air. The clatter of hooves on the cobblestones drew attention as a post rider, his coat dusted with early morning frost, galloped through the gates. Mrs. Harlan received the urgent papers, her face growing grave as she noted the magistrate's seal. She carried them directly to the Duke's study, where Aidan sat reviewing estate accounts. "Your Grace," she said, presenting the documents with concern. "These just arrived by special messenger." Aidan broke the seal, his expression darkening as he read. His hands clenched the papers, knuckles whitening. The petition from Amara's in-laws claimed she remained bound to them through unpaid debts from her late husband. They demanded her immediate return as their lawful property. "Lies," he growled, rising from his chair. "They treated her as less than human, and now they dare claim ownership?" He paced the study, running a hand through his dark hair. The magistrate cannot possibly uphold this. But even as he spoke, he knew better. The corrupt magistrate had long been in the pocket of wealthy families who viewed people like Amara as property rather than souls deserving dignity. The same magistrate who had turned a blind eye to previous reports of the in-laws' cruelty. Aidan found Amara in the kitchen garden, gathering herbs for the cook. Morning sunlight caught the silver threads in her dark hair, and for a moment, he hesitated to shatter her peace. "Miss Amara," he called softly. She turned, her smile fading as she saw his expression. Inside his study, she read the petition with trembling hands. "They will never let me be free," she whispered, a tear sliding down her cheek. "I will fight this," Aidan declared, his voice fierce with conviction. "They have no true claim on you. I will not let them take you back to that life of abuse." But Amara saw beyond his brave words. She understood the whispers that already circulated about her presence at Rothwell Manor, the raised eyebrows at a duke championing a foreign-born maid. Now, with legal challenges mounting, she could not bear to bring scandal upon the man who had shown her such kindness. That afternoon, while Aidan consulted with his solicitor in the library, Amara quietly packed her few belongings into a small bundle: her father's wooden cross, a spare apron, the handkerchief Aidan had given her that tearful evening. Each item she folded represented a piece of hope she must surrender. As evening descended, she slipped into the manor's small chapel. Candles flickered before the altar, casting dancing shadows on the stone walls. Amara knelt, her bundle beside her, and clasped her hands in prayer. "Lord," she whispered, her voice catching, "give me strength to do what must be done. I cannot let him risk everything, his reputation, his standing, perhaps even his authority over his own household, all for my sake. Tears fell freely now. Better that I go quietly, carrying the memory of his kindness in my heart. She did not hear Aidan's approach until his shadow fell across the chapel floor. He stood in the doorway, his tall frame backlit by the hallway's torches, his face unreadable in the dim light. "You mean to leave," he said. Not a question. Amara rose, smoothing her skirts with shaking hands. "Your Grace, I must. The magistrate will rule against me. We both know this. I cannot bear to bring disgrace upon you and your household." "No," the word echoed in the small chapel, firm as stone. "Please," she begged, her voice breaking. "Let me go back. It would be better than watching them tear down everything you have built, everything you are." Aidan crossed the chapel in 3 long strides. He stood before her, close enough that she could see the fierce determination in his eyes, bright in the candlelight. "I will not let them take you," he vowed, his voice low and intense. "Not back to cruelty, not back to bondage, not while I draw breath." They stood there, their silhouettes merging against the flickering candlelight, each heart torn between love and sacrifice. Amara's bundle lay forgotten at their feet, while above them, the chapel's ancient beams stood witness to a moment where duty and desire, protection and propriety, waged their silent war. Morning arrived at Rothwell Manor shrouded in mist, the sun barely a pale disk above the horizon. Inside his father's study, Aidan stood surrounded by towering shelves of leather-bound books and stacks of yellowing papers. Dust motes danced in the candlelight as he pulled another ledger from the shelf, his fingers tracing the neat columns of faded ink. "There must be something," he muttered, running a hand through his disheveled hair. He had been at this task since before dawn, searching through years of his father's meticulous records. The old Duke had been fastidious about keeping every contract, every business agreement, every scrap of paper that might prove important. The candle guttered, casting strange shadows across the cramped study. Aidan's eyes burned from strain, but he pressed on, driven by determination. His father had conducted extensive trade in the Caribbean during his later years, and something in Amara's story had stirred a memory of those dealings. Hour after hour passed as he combed through leather folios and brass-bound chests. Servants came and went, bringing fresh candles and offering breakfast, but he waved them away. The morning sun climbed higher, its weak rays filtering through grimy windows, but still he searched. Near midday, his hands dusty and cramped, Aidan reached deep into a forgotten drawer and felt something different, a packet of papers bound with faded ribbon, sealed with his father's crest in red wax. His heart quickened as he broke the seal, carefully unfolding the brittle pages. His eyes widened as he read. Here, in his father's precise handwriting, was a detailed record of indenture contracts, purchased from Caribbean merchants. Page after page listed names, dates, and amounts, and then, near the bottom, a separate section marked, "Released and nullified." "Dear God," he breathed, hands trembling as he read further. Among the listed names was Amara's, her indenture contract marked as purchased, and then formally nullified 3 years prior. His father had released dozens of such contracts, believing the practice of indenture too close to slavery for his conscience to bear. The document bore not only his father's signature, but those of 2 witnesses and a royal clerk. It was ironclad, legal proof that Amara had been free for years, that her late husband's family had no claim on her whatsoever. Aidan pressed the papers flat on the desk, smoothing their creases with careful fingers. Dawn light was just breaking anew outside. He had searched through the entire night without realizing it. His body ached from hunching over ledgers, his eyes were gritty with exhaustion, but his heart soared with triumph. He gathered the precious documents and strode from the study, his boots echoing on the manor's wooden floors. Servants scattered before him, noting his disheveled appearance and the fierce light in his eyes. Through the great hall he went, out into the courtyard, where the morning mist still clung to the cobblestones. There, by the kitchen garden, stood Amara. She had clearly slept no better than he. Her face was pale, dark circles shadowing her eyes. She had taken to rising early, he knew, to avoid the curious stares of other servants. Now she stood frozen, watching his approach, one hand pressed to her throat. The rising sun caught the silver threads in her dark hair, and despite her obvious exhaustion, Aidan thought she had never looked more beautiful. Her eyes met his, and in them he saw a flicker of the hope she had nearly abandoned the night before in the chapel. He clutched the documents, these precious papers, that would ensure her freedom, as he crossed the courtyard toward her. The morning air was crisp with autumn's chill, but his heart felt warmer than it had in years. The carriage wheels splashed through deep puddles as Aiden and Amara made their way to the magistrate's hall. Autumn rains had turned the roads treacherous, and their progress was slow. Inside the carriage, Amara sat straight-backed, her hands folded in her lap, while two of Rothwell's most trusted servants rode facing them as witnesses. The magistrate's hall loomed ahead, a gray stone building that seemed to frown upon their approach. Inside, the chamber was already crowded with curious onlookers. Amara's former in-laws stood near the front, their faces twisted with spite. The magistrate, a portly man in an ill-fitting black robe, peered down from his high bench. His lip curled as he surveyed Amara. So, this is the ungrateful woman who fled her rightful masters. She fled abuse and false imprisonment. Aiden's voice rang out clear and strong. The magistrate waved his hand dismissively. The family's claim appears sound. She owes a debt, which was settled years ago. Aiden interrupted, stepping forward. He withdrew the sealed document from his coat and presented it with flourish. By my late father, the previous Duke of Rothwell. Gasps echoed through the chamber. As the magistrate examined the paper, his face reddened as he read, unable to ignore the royal clerk's seal and the witnesses' signatures. This appears to be in order, he ground out between clenched teeth. Aiden turned to face the gathered crowd. Too long have we allowed corruption to masquerade as justice, he declared, his voice carrying to every corner. True nobility lies not in titles or wealth, but in protecting the innocent and upholding what is right. The in-laws shrank back as hostile murmurs rose from the crowd. Their faces burned with shame as neighbors turned away from them. The woman is free, the magistrate announced grudgingly. This hearing is concluded. Outside, sunshine had broken through the clouds, gleaming on the wet cobblestones. As Amara descended the hall steps, villagers who had once looked through her now bowed respectfully. Several women curtsied, whispering, "God bless you, miss." Aiden stepped to her side and took her hand in his, lifting it to rest on his arm in full view of everyone. Several older ladies gasped at this public display, but others smiled approvingly. Amara trembled, overwhelmed by the sudden change in her fortunes. Joy and disbelief warred in her heart as she looked up at Aiden, seeing in his eyes a promise of more happiness to come. The autumn sun blessed Rothwell Manor as servants bustled about, hanging fragrant pine garlands and white ribbons throughout the chapel. Clara, her health improved by joy, scattered red and white rose petals along the stone aisle, humming the hymns Amara had taught her. "More petals here, my dear. Mrs. Harlan directed with a warm smile, pointing to a bare spot. The housekeeper had transformed from skeptic to staunch supporter, orchestrating the wedding preparations with motherly pride. In his study, Aiden sealed the last document bearing the royal dispensation. His influence at court had secured a special license, waiving the traditional reading of the banns. The paper bore the king's own seal, marking this union as blessed not only by God but by the crown itself. "Your Grace," his valet murmured, "it is time." Aiden stood before the chapel's ancient altar, sunlight streaming through stained glass windows and casting rainbow patterns across his formal attire. The pews filled with family, household staff, and villagers, all ranks united in witness to love's victory over prejudice. The Dowager Duchess sat in the front row, her stern features softened by an emotion she had not expected to feel. Watching Amara these past weeks, her grace under pressure, her kindness to Clara, her unwavering faith, had melted the ice around the older woman's heart. When Amara appeared in the doorway, a collective breath was drawn. She wore a gown of cream silk, simple yet elegant, with pearl buttons down the back that the maids had sewn on themselves. Her dark curls were crowned with orange blossoms, and in her hands she carried white roses bound with ribbon. As she walked down the aisle, her step steady and sure, the choir began to sing one of her beloved hymns. The melody soared to the chapel's vaulted ceiling, carrying with it the prayers and hopes of all assembled. At the altar, Aiden took her hands in his. His voice rang clear and strong as he spoke the ancient vows. "With this ring, I thee Wednesday. With my body, I thee worship. With all my worldly goods, I thee endow. Amara's response came soft but unwavering, her eyes bright with joyful tears. I take thee as my wedded husband, to have and to hold, from this day forward. The Dowager Duchess stepped forward at the crucial moment. I give my blessing, she declared, her voice carrying to every corner of the chapel. She pressed a kiss to Amara's cheek, whispering, "Welcome to our family, my dear." When the priest pronounced them man and wife, Duke and Duchess of Rothwell, the chapel erupted in cheers. The bells began to ring, their joyous pealing echoing across the estate and into the village beyond. Hand in hand, Aidan and Amara walked back down the aisle. Sunlight streamed through the windows, seeming to form a golden path before them. Servants and nobles alike smiled and bowed, united in celebration of love's triumph over cruelty and prejudice. Outside the chapel doors, rose petals rained down upon them. Clara darted forward to embrace them both, her small face radiant with happiness. The gathered crowd cheered as Aidan drew Amara close for their first kiss as husband and wife. Amara's tears flowed freely now, but they were tears of joy. In Aidan's love, in the acceptance of his family, in the respect of the household and village, she had found more than a home. She had found her place in a world that had once scorned her. The bells rang on, heralding not just a marriage, but the victory of virtue, courage, and faith. Thank you for watching. Stories like this remind us who we are. If something touched your heart, go ahead and subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow with another story that just might stay with you.